Hey guys, I'm here today with Adrian from Germany, and we're going to do a little talk about the young fellas in the Model A world. So we'll go over the technical things, what got us into it, and what we plan to do in the future, and our experiences so far. So, Adrian, go ahead and give a little introduction.
Well, we met through YouTube, I think. So you have a YouTube channel, and I have a YouTube channel. We both kind of tinker around with old stuff, and among that old stuff is also a car, which happens to be the same on both our sides. It's a Model A Ford, and you know, along with the Model A Ford, there is a whole lot of machine work to be done. So I have a rather substantial machine shop in the basement in which I do all sorts of repairs and maintenance and, get old stuff back up and running basically with the personal goal of using as much of it as possible in just on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, good stuff. I'm building a little machine shop too, and out in the shed, and there's some pretty obsolete machines that we have in common, and they still do the job, that's for sure. So, we'll start off. What got you into Model A's?
Well, it's been the craze for old technology basically all my life. I remember when I was like 3 years old, we had an old IBM Selectric typewriter in kindergarten, and we kids just used to hack about on it. And I came home and asked my parents about, do we have a typewriter? Yes, we had one, and that started that thing. So after about 3 years, I had 13 typewriters in the shelf. And after having all the typewriters I could imagine, I had to move on, and it became telephones, and it became radios, and phonographs, and what have you. Um, Basically, up until it was steam engines, and the steam engine craze kind of got into the tinkering craze. So I no longer just accumulated the old stuff, but I also wanted to start fixing old stuff up because steam engines can become quite expensive. And a great way to save the money is by buying a scrap old steam engine and fixing it up yourself. And that kind of got me into the workshop. So I started up in the workshop of my granddad with, the basic of tools like a file and a vise and a bench grinder and so on. Slowly got into lathes and obviously old machinery, because the old machinery was always the stuff that was easy and cheap to obtain, and also easy and cheap to fix with just the basic tools I had on hand. And so, over the time, it slowly got into, well, shall we say, a lifestyle where I thought, well, I like the old radios and I like the way an old desk fan looks like. Why not just, integrate it into daily life and live up to the cliche of, yeah, the old stuff is always breaking down and it's unreliable and it takes a lot of work to keep it up and running, and just say, forget about it. My radio is switched on every day and it runs 8 hours straight and hasn't given me a trouble since. I started moving out of, the insulated room and got a bicycle age 15, which was basically just as old as all the other crap I had accumulated, and started daily driving that one to work and to school and what have you. Well, and ultimately I got into the age where everybody had a driver's license and I was dreaming about my first car. Obviously had to be an old one, and obviously had to be capable of taking the struggles of, punishing through all bad weather and the daily use and abuse that a car can meet. Um, I first started out with thinking about like a Mercedes W123, one of the usual diesel engines which just have the habit of going on forever and ever and ever.
Hmm.
And I kind of dislike the features that, like, a plastic wheel, steering wheel, or chintzy made stuff. Even on the stuff that's known to last forever, it just wasn't, my kind of thing. So I gradually went back and back, further and further in the time. In the 50s, in Germany, cars, they had a huge problem with rust. So you can't really buy a 1950s German car without having the same car in spare parts right next to it, because everything's just going to fall apart into rusty pieces. And so I went even further back in time, ended up pre-war, obviously. And that was the kind of car which, I thought, yep, I might be able to fix just about everything on it because there's no, spot welded sheets of metal which have cavities in them which you can't reach and so on and so forth. The problem with the German pre-war cars is that they are mostly being used up in the war, and if they hadn't died at the front, then during the lean period after the war, they just got the rest. So German pre-war cars was no alternative. And I just, blatantly looked what was the most bought or most sold car during the pre-war era. Obviously, the Ford Model T. And if you look a little bit into Ford Model Ts, then you'll quickly notice that it's not that easy to take one through daily drive because most of them are completely open. So they just have a fold down canopy and you're open to the elements. You have 2 gears, you have 20 horsepower, transmission, brake. It just keeps on getting worse and worse. And so, for the first time, I basically took a step back and said, well, that's a little bit too archaic for me. And, well, ended up with the Ford Model A, standard 3-pedal pattern on the floor and 3-gear shift lever, just like we know it today. And in the basics, a more or less modern car.
Yeah, that's I can relate to that. The interest in the T, the Tin Lizzie, all with the little headlights queued up on the wooden wheels and stuff. And my neighbor who had a Model A said, get the heck away from that. Those things are little rattly, crazy boxes. So
Death traps, yeah.
So go with the Model A. And the other connection, well, I mean, leading up to it, very similar to you, I got into old stuff, old radios, and started fixing and tinkering and building things. And just before car age came, it was transport age and a bicycle. I live in the countryside in Canada, so a bicycle was kind of pushing it for where I had to get. So I put a 2-stroke engine on my mom's pink mountain bike and spray painted it army green. And so for a whole summer, I rode 5 kilometers a day. And the only thing that broke on it was a master link in the chain, and that was a $2 fix. So that was great mechanical stuff. And then started to get into old cars, 30s. Model T was too cryptic. 30s, nice. There was a Willys Whippet. And then I started to learn, okay, you have tin and you have wood bodies. And everything kind of shifted to tin later in the 30s, but the early stuff, you had to watch out. So the Whippet, Willys Whippet, was pretty comparable to the Model A, all things considered. 4-wheel brakes, flat force engine. But it had a wood structured body. And I was talking to a neighbor over here as a Model A, and he said back in the day when they were touring, he saw a friend driving his Willy Whippet on a rainy day go sideways into a curb, and the whole thing just became splinters. It just exploded like a popsicle stick cabin. So, and you have your own story with a 4-door Model A, and the 4 doors had wood. So, long story short, I take a wrong turn on the highway one day. Holy gee, there's 7 Model A's, different, the Hucksters, Coupe, Tour, Roadster, all of the above. And I talked to them, and they said, yeah, there's a club based out of Ottawa. So I said, I got to get involved with that. So I met a fella in Brockville, which is about 2 hours from here, who had a whole bunch of parts, and he sold me like a kit, the frame, the engine, transmission, rear end, wheels, blah blah blah, all in parts. So I loaded up a dump trailer, brought it home, dumped the trailer, through the club, got to be part of the Model A Youth Restoration Program, which applies to anyone 21 and under. And there's quite a few throughout Canada and the States. I want to say around 15 youth get supported by the program. And if you're eligible, it's run every 2 years. If you're eligible, either you or a parent or family member has to be part of the Model A Restorers Club, and you have to be within the age group and have your own car that you're working on, or at least part. And so that was approximately $2,000 US, which goes a pretty good way. And stuff's expensive, but that goes a pretty good way, especially starting from the bottom. So with that help, I got a whole chassis running. And the thing is, the steering column is supported by the cab, the gas tank. I think I mentioned this story before, but I got excited, go get it running. And it's springtime. I've been working on it in the shop all winter. Take it out in the yard, take it to the end of the driveway, and I kind of go in this little dip in the grass and spin around. Well, what happens when I spin around, I crank the steering wheel, which, because the only fixture was at the frame, I was too giddy to actually mount it to the body. So it was just the frame rail to the steering column so it could move. When I twisted it, the whole thing went whoop, which made the throttle on the steering column go wide open. So I went, and the back wheel just spun,
Oh, a
and
slide.
I sank right down into the mud, and I got stuck, and I had to do the walk of shame back in the long driveway to pull it out. So anyway, after that, I realized it's going to be a long time to do the whole bodywork and stuff. I want a car now before they outlaw gasoline or whatever happens. So I bought a complete two-door, a 1928 Canadian two-door, and with the knowledge that I gained from building chassis, I've been running this thing all over the place. So that's, and also my grandfather grew up in a Model A, and he had his own stories of his brother driving, and they collected a bunch of chairs from the local cheese factory for a family gathering. They went over the highway, the chairs started to go forward. He kind of went to block and cranked the wheel at the same time, and they went plunk in the ditch. So with that Model A, so yeah, that's how I got into it. I kind of touched on how my Model A was found there too. The two-door was, as I got the 28 Canadian two-door, came through the same club, and a member was moving out east, and it just happened to be right place, right time, and I got it from him, and it's been an absolute beautiful car. He treated it well. The previous owner, so since 28, I'm the fourth owner. The previous owner, Vic, he put a bunch of reasonable upgrades, which we'll go into later, but he drove it 80,000 miles. He drove it to Newfoundland, which is like a whole bunch of provinces over, all through the States, and he toured properly with it. So with that, I'll let you explain how your Model A was found, how you got yours.
Well, I've been looking, on and off semi-seriously for Model A's around your location for, shall we say, 3 to 4 years. I've been, instigated with the virus by Jonathan Klinger from Hagerty Insurance, who did his 365 Days of A
Yeah,
project.
that was a good one.
Absolutely marvelous, and basically took most of the fear I had about the whole idea off my shoulders. And ever since, I'd just, loosely been looking around for announcements, selling the car here and there, just to get an impression what these cars are worth, what they go for, and what to expect, what the range of cars is. I obviously didn't want a 100-point restored car. I didn't want a barn find because I wanted to go ahead and drive it. Just get myself a good picture about what the market had to offer. And semi-secretly, because my parents didn't really have the understanding for the youngster wanting an old car with no seatbelts, no airbags, and all of that jazz. Yeah, I kind of shied away from the idea of owning a car rather soon. Well, and then one day I noticed that they offered a car about 20 kilometers from my home from a reputable seller for a price more than fair. And I just said to myself, well, it would be stupid to not at least drive over there and take a look at it, because at that time I had only seen one other Ford Model A in person. And, just to get an idea of what the market had to offer. Drove over there, had a look at it, and, long story short, got kicked off the grounds for asking too many questions about the car. And went home a little bit depressed because, yes, it was a good car, but on the other hand, the way the seller acted up, I thought he must have had something to hide. He did. I found out about a year later, but nothing, seriously wrong with the car. Anyways, all of a sudden, my father said, well, then go out and buy the car, for God's sakes, just so you shut up. And, that I did. Yeah, so I went there for at least 2 other occasions with people who knew their stuff around old timers and, knew where to look for and what to look for before buying a car. Made double and triply sure that the seller had all the right paperwork, that I was not buying some kind of stolen hot car somewhere which was unregisterable. Oh, and then put the money on the table and bought the car. And basically that's how I got the hands on it. More or less out of coincidence. I didn't plan on owning such a car at least until maybe age 30, I thought. And all of a sudden it followed me home.
Way to go.
Yeah, and I'm pretty happy. I mean, yes, later on I discovered that the car must have had been in an accident. I found a listing of what had to be my car from, shall we say, 3 years earlier, and it went for two-thirds more of a price. And it was spotless, absolutely beautiful. But I could figure out, from a couple of things where screws were shiny chrome plated on those pictures and painted black on mine, and from certain bends and mismatches in the panel gaps on my car that probably during transport somewhere it must have just gotten a slight yoink at the front, which crumbled the mud guards a little bit. It's nothing tragic, but obviously that's what he was trying to hide, and which he did hide successfully. But other than that, I got a very, very fair priced car, which was a perfect runner from the get-go. I did put a lot of work into it after I bought the car, but it was never a car that would stall on me mid-trip or would act up anything, or where I would have been worried not to arrive back home again, or would take the trunk full of spare parts just to make sure that nothing happens on the trip. It's always been a very trustworthy car, and that's of course a huge morale booster if you're new into the hobby and don't know the people yet to get around with and to ask help from, is when the car is just a runner and it keeps being reliable and satisfying.
Yeah, I wanted to ask because it was tweaked, because there were just, even if something's a little bit tweaked in the whole alignment, have you noticed uneven tire wear ever?
Absolutely not. No,
Hmm.
it had old tires on it when it was when I bought it. They were like 30 years old, and you could see uneven wear on them. So I thought, yikes, what am I going to get myself into? But after I put on fresh tires, they basically still look like new. I think I've got 20,000 kilometers on them, and there's nothing really to indicate that they have been driven a mile. The car tracks straight. I can let go of the steering wheel, and it doesn't wander off to one side or veer into the oncoming traffic. So I got off pretty lucky on that one. It could have very well, bent the frame or got the
Yeah,
wheels out of alignment, something like that. But luckily, it didn't happen. Either that or the mechanic who worked on it afterward really knew what he was doing.
yeah, good show. Yeah. With that, I'll start to get into modifications.
Yeah.
So my car has quite a few modifications on it. I'd like to say they're all tasteful. Um, the only things that are really outright are the lights. If you like, easy to notice. Blinkers are put on in the bumper on the front and back, LED blinkers, and an LED brake light has been put in the back window, and it stands out very much. My car still has the one. It's an early 28, so it's a drum, like a Model T drum tail light, and it only has one. So to this day, the Ontario Traffic Act only requires one tail light on cars. So you can get away with it. Cars are just made with two to be symmetric, I guess, and or safe, whichever.
See,
um, yeah. So the so that's the most obvious things to see, but I'm thankful for them, especially that brake light because I do drive at night often enough. Uh, with respect to the drive line, we'll go front to back. So it has the floater motor mounts in the back. The front motor mount is the stock. Um, Never had a problem there. The rubber is still supple. I know sometimes guys have had them for a long time. The rubber ends up getting hard, and then it kind of becomes useless. But these are still supple. Vibration is minimal. The cylinder head, has been upgraded to the 5.5 to 1 instead of the factory, what is it, 3.8? Is that
yeah, yeah.
approximately?
Seems fair enough, yeah.
3.8,
No,
yeah.
isn't it 4.4?
It could be 4.4. I don't remember. Anyway,
Hang
it's
on,
a upgrade.
let me
Yeah,
ask
yeah.
Google.
You look up. So it's 5.5 to 1, which is a higher compression than from the factory head. So it gives it a few more horsepower. And
4.2 to 1.
okay, okay, there we go. So a little increase there. Definitely noticeable power from a stock Model A that I've driven to this one. Significantly noticeable. The engine's also been upgraded to the main bearings are still Babbitt and the rod bearings are inserts. So that's I don't really know why one was done but not the other, but anyway, I'm not complaining. The rear end is 3.54 instead of a 3.78, which is the factory. 3.54 is pretty reasonable for cruising. Most of the guys in the club have gone to that rear end. I know a 3.27 is also offered, which is a pretty significant change. From what I've read online, I don't know anyone who has it. They said you almost completely lose your top end torque. So that seems a little bit extreme to me, but I guess if you are in a place where you're always cruising, maybe that's okay on somewhat flat land. But around hills, we have some hills here. I know you have quite a hilly area. So yeah, that's driveline. The crankshaft's been balanced on mine too. Again, very noticeable. The flywheel has been reduced in weight from 60 pounds to 45, I want to say, and the V8 style clutch has been put in there. The brakes have been upgraded to cast iron drum brakes, which is, and you have experience there too, I'll let you talk about. And the final thing of significance is I don't have the viscous dampers, the traditional arm shocks. I have coil springs that kind of go in the fronts and backs, and that's very noticeable, especially for body roll. I don't have very much, go around the corner and do this type of thing. It's pretty reasonable. So, yeah, my tires are stock, bias ply style with tubes, standard. Modifications. I had a cracked rim, so I had to weld that, but such is life in Model A's. Just pull it off, grind it, weld it, paint it. I want to say that's, and a stone guard is added to the front for the radiator. Although I do really like the contrast of the shiny shell and the dark rad from the factory. For the gravel roads and stuff around here, the stone guard is useful. So I'll let you take over the modification department.
Well, let me take a look at my notes here so I don't forget anything. The things that you mentioned already that I have on my car too are the floater motor mounts. As you told, mine were rock solid when I had the car first, and it was an absolute rattle can, this thing, especially under engine braking, going down a hill. You thought your head was going to explode and your teeth were going to fall out. It was just a terrifying ride. And that was one of the very few parts that I couldn't obtain in Germany, was fresh rubbers for the floater motors. So I had to get creative, and I just bought some kind of vibration dampening rubber, which you put underneath, say, washing machines, for example, and found something which roughly fitted, and then just trimmed it and drilled it out on the lathe to fit my purposes, and it's been doing fine ever since. What I like about the floater motors is that they are also adjustable. So I played around with the adjustments a little bit, and you can either make it a very comfortable car, in city driving where you absolutely do not take notice of the engine whatsoever. Then, however, it's going to get very noisy at high speeds. And what I've got myself adjusted now is that it's a pretty firm car all the way around. So it's never where you think you're falling apart, but it's never really comfortable either. So especially when going 20, 30 miles an hour up a hill, then you still notice that the rubber mounts are a little stiff, but such is life. If you have a counterbalanced crank, then that's probably an issue that you won't have to live with. I have a leakless water pump installed.
Oh yeah, me as well. Yeah.
It's one of those things which, as you say, it's a tasteful modification. It just replaces the cotton seal or graphite yarn seal packing, which you have to retighten every so and then, and it's going to eat into the shaft, and it's going to start leaking grease into the radiator and stuff. And just put a rubber O-ring in there and be happy with your life. I have, as you say, indicators fitted. Mine are hidden in the city lights, so it's illegal to drive around with them in Germany. So I figure, there's yellow tinted glass for the city lights available, so might as well put them right in there. I have the second headlight installed because it's a legal requirement again in Germany. I have a fuse on the starter and a battery cutout switch.
Yeah.
I installed belts. You kind of teased a little story there. I learned driving the Model A on a four-door leatherback sedan from 1929, I think. And it's an older restoration. It's been done somewhere in the 1960s. And, you know, over time, wood just starts to live or work itself loose. And we went around a roundabout, and you know, it's kind of these, you go right into the roundabout and left out of the roundabout and then right again. And it's the car, well, it does have shock absorbers fitted, but they're not really in working order. So, you know, the entire car did the IKEA shelf, as we call it. And basically the whole wooden structure shifted so far that the door swung open. And I immediately went, you know, flying out of the car like that, and had nothing but the steering wheel to hold on to. Kind of had to still steer out of the roundabout so as not to crash into anything else, and barely managed to get myself back behind the wheel. And that was, you know, the reason where I decided, well, I have to have seatbelts. They're not going to save your life, but they're going to keep you inside the car when you need to be inside the car. That's basically the main reason I have them. They are very easy to fit on a coupe as well. So, you know, with a 2-door and 4-door, you're going kind of have to weld support structures underneath the car and then drill holes through the frame. And with the coupe, it's all already kind of there. So where the trunk ends and where the passenger compartment begins, there's a nice solid step out of thick metal, and with some load spreading washers like that diameter, you can easily fit them right there with just drilling 2 holes and it's done. I have the modern style points and condenser in my distributor.
Yeah.
Again, one of those modifications which very tasteful, and they take off a whole lot of, you know, a load off your shoulders, because from what I have been told is that the reproduction phenolic friction pads on the original style points just aren't the quality that they're supposed to be. They wear down rather quickly. And it's just a constant needing to readjust them, and they wear out so quickly that it's just not fun anymore. And with the modern style, they are from the 1970s Ford Mustang, I think. They have a Teflon rubber pad, a friction pad on them. And, you know, they are made for 6,000 RPM straight line. And so they're going to be plenty fine for the Model A. What I dislike about them is that they're not as easy to adjust as the original style. The original style has a little thumb screw with a counter nut on there. And with the modern style, you just have to lever around with a screwdriver and kind of wrench it. That being said, I adjusted them when I got the car fresh, and then just rechecked it once a year and didn't have to readjust anything so far. So,
yeah, mine as well. They barely wear.
Yeah, exactly. Moving on, I have an oil filter and an air filter on my car, which just makes sense. You know, with modern oils, you can kind of stretch the intervals that you change your oils. Back in the day,
what is your interval?
I tend to do it every 2,500 miles. So, you know, every 5,000 miles, the big service where you have to drain the crankcase and drain the transmission and the differential. And so for every second engine oil change, I do the transmission and crankcase. You know, just to keep track of what I'm doing when. And, you know, the oils of today are just not used up after 500 miles like they were back in the day. Back in the day, after 500 miles of running, you would empty the oil pan and it would just come out like water, because, yeah, the oil was just done for. And today that's just not the case. So oil filter, definitely a good idea. Then there's a lot of little things, like, for example, the fog lights that I added, or the light in the trunk, you know, small things that I just noticed are good to have when you run your car on a daily basis. And, you know, in the dark, you kind of need to unload something from your trunk and there's no light in there. Well, just fit a light. I modified my fuel shutoff valve because I just kept having trouble with the original style leaking again, and buying a new one and lapping the old one and so on. Just got onto my nerves, so I built my a la casa version. And the last big modification I've done to date is fit the cast iron drum brakes, which, you know, night and day difference. Absolutely astonishing. I had high hopes for this one, but undescribable. It's the amount of pedal force that it took me to get to a reasonable stop back in the day, or to hold the car when standing on a red traffic light on an incline. My foot would start shaking after some time because it took so much force. And now I just loosely lay my foot on there with its own weight, and it already kind of doesn't, what would have been an emergency brake with the steel
I
drum. So
remember when you, before you had converted, just when we'd have our conversations, you mentioned, just kind of casually, you'd mention, yeah, and when I hit the brakes, like I had to pull the steering wheel, I had to put so much force just to stop. And I was thinking, that can't be right, you know? There must be something a little bit off. So obviously the old steel brakes were getting a little bit ripe.
yeah, I mean, I rode them hard. I remember vividly that they were better when I got the car fresh.
Yeah.
And then we did a big road trip with our car club through a very mountainous region. And well, there comes the high compression head that you were talking about, because they were just racing in front of me when it went uphill. And then downhill, they had all the engine braking, which I didn't have. And so I just kept grilling and grilling my brake pads. And at some point, we were going down into a valley, and in the bottom of the valley, there was a T crossing with a stop sign. The guy in front of me stops, and as you say, I pulled on the steering wheel like that. I have the dash cam footage somewhere where, basically you can see my whole body move up at least, say, half a meter from the seat, from all the pressure that I put onto the pedal. And the car just didn't stop. Nothing happened. And somehow I thought about it, and I just reached down quickly and put on the handbrake, and that was basically the last little bit that saved me from thumping into the guy. It was hilarious. I mean, not hilarious in the moment, but
Yeah, I
afterwards, it's
guess
just,
so.
how did you drive so far with such crappy brakes?
Cripes. Yeah, I bet you're happy with that upgrade. Mm, yeah. Any more upgrades on your end?
Um, Not for the moment. I mean, I have plans for future upgrades, but that's for another topic.
Yeah.
Um,
Touch on the type of oil filter you have and why you went that way.
Well, I have the partial flow oil filter, which is not the usual choice that most people make, because the obvious solution is the full flow kit, where the oil that comes from the oil pump is directly fed into an oil filter, and before it can enter the engine, everything of the oil is getting filtered and then dumped into the valve train chamber there. And the oil filter kit that I chose is the partial flow kit, which takes the inspection plug on the side of the oil pump, which you also use to keep the oil pump in place when you remove the oil pan and put it back in to, keep the oil pump from falling down. And it takes a tiny bit out of there through, an orifice, maybe 3 millimeters in diameter. So the main amount of oil is still going to the engine, but all the while the engine is running, a tiny bit of oil always gets fed into the filter, into the filter, into the filter, and gets dumped onto the timing gear. And it's a type of filter which is definitely only making sense if you drive your car a lot. If it's the kind of, go get for ice cream, 5 minutes in and out kind of deal, then it's just not going to work. I had several occasions where I thought, yeah, it's about time to change my oil. And then I went for a long trip, like 2 hours on in, and the oil was cleaner when I returned home than, when I had started. So it's definitely a long time run kind of filter. But the reason why I chose it, or the two reasons why I chose it, is number one, it's a lot more discreet.
Yeah, I
With
like that.
the
It
full
looks more
flow filter,
natural.
exactly, the full flow kit, it just sticks out right into your face. The filter is just, screwed onto the timing,
The
the
valve.
valve chest cover, and it's just, yeah. I'm all for optics, especially in the engine compartments. And if something just looks at me like that, I couldn't live with it. And with the partial flow filter kit, it's just neatly tucked away towards the side. And it looks like it could be like a starter motor or a generator. It just looks like it belongs there. That's basically also the main reason why I bought it. It's cheaper than the full flow kit, and it's a lot easier to install. With the full flow kit, you have to remove obviously the valve cover, and then you have to remove the intake exhaust manifold, the carburetor, and all that jazz. And with me having successfully cured my exhaust leak after trial and error and error and error and trial again, I am
Just
kind of
don't
not
want
in the mood
to.
to take
Yeah.
the manifold back off again. So yeah, that's basically my reasons for the partial flow filter kit. I have no issue with it. Many people reached out to me and said, "Oh, not all the oil is getting filtered, and the engine is getting dirty oil, and this and that and the other." Well, the oil now, after 2,500 miles of running, is still cleaner than it was 500 miles without a filter. So it can't be that bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's pretty good. I'm planning on going that way with the partial flow as well. I just can't get over the it just looks gross.
Yeah, yeah.
The full flow setup. And you're
The
still
only
running.
thing you
Oh
have
yeah,
to
go ahead.
remember, though, is to poke the membrane or rubber valve inside your oil filter.
Yeah.
Nowadays, obviously, cars are designed to run on oil pressure, not like a Model T or A would. And especially with the partial flow system, there just isn't any pressure to overcome this rubber one-way check valve. So you're going to have to go in there with a pair of scissors or some kind of tweezers and rip a couple of chunks out of there. It doesn't have to be a neat job. Who cares how it looks like, as long as it's a hole where oil can pass through. That's all it takes.
That's a good point to bring up too. As for electrical, you're still running 6-volt positive ground,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and you're still running a generator, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
Um,
that's probably future upgrade touch then. Well, maybe for you. I'm running the 6-volt alternator, and it's really nice, especially for headlights. You turn the headlights on, kind of idling, and then you give it a shot of gas, and the alternator kicks in, and your headlights get another tone of brightness to them. And I've never had a problem with the battery not charging or anything with that alternator. It's really it doesn't look smooth like a generator does, and it kind of looks. But if you spray bomb it black, it's pretty reasonable for what it does.
Well, the alternator, everybody can do with this car what he wants. I have the alternator on there because when I had it fresh, it didn't take me long. The generator, it didn't take me long to grill the windings in it because I didn't know you had to set the brush and the charging rate. So I always had it to full max, 30 amps, whatnot. And the only reason my battery didn't boil out is because the pre-owner put a 600 amp hour go-kart or golf cart battery in there, which just was meant to take it. But the generator didn't. And so I ended up, with the help of a friend who knows his stuff around electric motors, rewinding the whole damn thing. And after all that effort, I wanted to ride the hell out of it, and that I did. And it hasn't given me problems ever since. Yes, it is a little weak when you have the lights on and you're stepping on the brake and you want to honk the horn. Then it's more like rather than any audible sound coming out of there. But for just getting your battery charged, and even in the nighttime having bright lights, it's, in my opinion, plenty sufficient. Of course, it's a pretty tough decision to make for everybody because not everybody has my eyesight, not everybody has my lamps, not everybody has the cables that I have. So cars are going to be different, and the safe option is always the alternator because it's going to be reliable, it's going to keep your battery charged, and it's meant to take the power that it takes when you have all your lamps on and all your electric consumers on, which the generator can struggle with. But on the other hand, I think the generator itself is disgratified a lot by just old wives' tales about them flaming up all the time, or the charging relay sticking
Yeah.
close and stuff like that. They are not as bad as everybody says they are. I have run mine for 2 years now without a fault, and it's okay. It's not the ultima ratio. It's not the best, but it's good.
Well, that's interesting. That's good you've had that experience because I've heard lots of the wives' tales. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I mean, it's a 90-year-old electrical component, so it's in the engine compartment. It gets 90 degrees centigrade in the summer from the engine heat, and in the winter it's at -5 on a cold start. It gets all the beating and all the old lacquer on the wires and so on, and it's going to start rubbing, and the bearings get shot and so on. Of course, at some point it's going to fail, but if it's a freshly rebuilt one, it should give you plenty of good service.
We'll move on to fluids.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't changed all of mine yet. I'm at the 5K mark now, but
Mm.
I'll use what I have. Anyway, engine oil, I change that every 1,000 miles. It's my engine only has about 5,000 miles on it. So I use the Shell Rotella T4, which is a diesel oil. What do they call it? Is it a 1540? 15W40? Anyway, Shell Rotella T4. It's meant for trucks and stuff like that, and it has a zinc content in it, which is good for the Babbitt bearings. At least that's what I've been told, and that's what most of the guys in the club run. Now's the time to say the worst oil now is better than the best oil then. that theory. So ultimately, you could get away with an awful lot worse. But when the Rotella goes on sale, you can buy a whole 5-gallon pail and just go with it. It's reasonable. Rear end and transmission, I run 600W, which is sold by the suppliers. The other option, I'm getting into steam engines. You're into the steam engines too. I'm getting into that, and steam oil is still available. They're really thick with tallow. It just looks like honey with bee legs and stuff in it. Anyway, really thick stuff. I believe that's what they ran originally. That's what was close to the original 600W. It's really steam oil. So most people say 80W90 gear oil is too thin. It's really available, but it's too thin. I think the other stuff you can get at most suppliers is 140 weight, or is it 240? Anyway, not too picky, but I run the 600W from distributors. And coolant, a lot of the guys in the club who have fresh motors, they run straight water, deionized water with the water wetter, which is a thing that's often used in racing to improve thermal conductivity. Maybe it would be better for people who have cooling problems, but I've never had a cooling problem. You have a heating problem. I'll let you go into that, but mine's never run hot on the warmest day. It's 28 too, so it has a smaller radiator than the 3031. I guess dimensionally smaller, but thickness, could say, makes up for that. So I just run standard antifreeze 50/50 ethylene glycol to water. And fluids, I believe those are the rear end, transmission, engine, coolant. I think that's about it for that. What's that?
Steering box, maybe?
Yeah, steering box, I run the same 600W gear oil. Yeah, you go for it.
Well, let me pick up on that phrase you said, any oil today is better than what they had in the 30s, which is completely right. And there is many people who just, go to the nearest drugstore, or, well, not drugstore maybe, but fuel stop and get whatever oil is in the shelf. The engine will run on it, no question there. The thing is that nowadays the tendency is more to think of old cars as something that will have to stay forever and has to keep in the state that it is in forever. And that just wasn't the case back in the day. I stumbled across an article, or a whole collection of articles from a tech magazine in the 30s called Gus Stories, and was very interesting to read in there that basically after 60,000 miles or 3 years, a car was considered junk. It was worn out. It was ready to go for the junk pile. It wasn't feasible to fix it up anymore. It was standard procedure to go every 20 to 30,000 miles and take the head off, clean out all the carbon residue from the poor gas that they had back in the day, grind and lap in all the valve seats, take off the oil pan and retighten the Babbitt bearings, take out a shim and remove the plate. A car was a high maintenance item, and it was common practice to have basically your whole engine taken apart in what nowadays you would call ridiculously short intervals. So yes, the oil today is better than what they had back then, but keep in mind that you don't want to get into an engine rebuild all too soon. So just like you said, I use oil with the zinc additive, which is also good for the flat tappet cams. And it might be overkill for the engine, but it's still, the additives are what keep the engine happy for a longer life expectancy than what it was actually designed to take. So what I use is a 20W50 from Rectol, which is a German oldtimer car brand, oldtimer oil brand. They also sell my transmission fluid, which is 250W or 250 weight. You can't get the 600W over here because it's an American blend, and shipping oil cross country, not a good idea. What I've added to that is just a small dose of molybdenum disulfate, both in the transmission and in the rear end. And what I found is that it helps with shifting. It doesn't take the double clutching away from you, but you can kind of ease into the gears, and it just doesn't go and hate you for doing it. But it's more like, it says and it doesn't like it, but it doesn't complain so much either. So especially in those situations when you're on a hill and there's 1,000 angry people behind you and you have to get off the traffic light quickly, then it's good. I noticed, despite it just being such a little dose, I was kind of not really in for the difference that it made, because yeah, it definitely helps you with shifting. In the winter, I even can go shifting without double clutching. So, in the Henry Ford manual, they tell you to upshift through the gears just like you would on a modern car. No double clutching, no hesitation, nothing. That was just completely impossible with my car back when I didn't have any additives in the oil. And after adding the molybdenum, it became possible. You need to be patient, but it is possible to at least upshift without double clutching. For the steering box, I had a pretty big steering box leak, which is, by the way, one other modification I have. I have a sealed steering box. Before that, I helped myself out with transmission grease, or flow grease is what they call it in Germany. It's basically like oil, but imagine you put it into a thin plastic bag. It kind of has a very, very high surface tension. So if you put it into, say, a glass with a thin hole in it, then it's not going to leak out there. It's going to cover everything in thick sludge, but it's and you can press it out of the container, but it's not going to run off anywhere. And that's, I think, a very nice compromise if you have a leaking steering box and don't want to take it all apart.
Yeah, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's a funny stuff. I can show you videos of it. It behaves kind of like gel or thin, glibbery, hard to describe. I never heard of it anyway. Myself and people from the oldtimer community told me, as a in-between solution, just so you don't have to keep adding a gallon of oil to the steering box every week. Just try that for the meantime, and it worked quite well until I cured the leak by putting in, a sealed shaft bushing in there, and now I run the straight 600 weight in there too.
Yeah, you got a free lubrication on the light switch.
Oh yeah, exactly, and it's corrosion protection of the entire undercarriage as well.
Yeah, automatic undercoating feature. Yeah.
Helped me with the horn as well, because the horn contact is just in the light switch. It's just a contact coming from up here and a spring coming from down here. And when it's all coated in oil, then try and get the horn running in a difficult situation. It's going to let you down. Last not least, coolant. Yeah.
I was gonna, just before it slipped my mind again, with respect to oil, engine oil, the modern oils, I think pretty well all of them, I don't know if they make a completely non-detergent oil anymore, but the detergents kind of suspend particles of filth, or whatever you want to say, and you pretty well need an oil filter to effectively run these modern oils. So old oil, the contaminants would become suspended as they travel through the engine, and the deep, deep lake of an oil pan, the kind of goal was that these particles would settle out, and eventually you drop the oil pan, wipe out the sludge. But
that's
modern
where the term
oils
comes from.
Okay, I didn't know that. Yeah, deep, deep freaking things. And you don't have that anymore. It's supposed to keep the grit, the dirt suspended so that the oil filter can take it out. So if you're not running an oil filter, I guess that's one of the reasons why you change it so often, but it's kind of wasteful in a sense. So oil filter is definitely the way to go. Yeah, continue with coolant there.
Yeah, coolant, well, as you said, I do not have any problems with temperature. You have the 2829 model with the smaller radiator, which is, in my opinion, despite not looking the part. It's you know, a lot more adequately sized for the engine that's behind it. And all they did for 3031 is just oomph up the radiator without doing anything to the engine. So I never had anything showing on my temp gauge. And especially in the winter, I would drive for an hour or so and park the car somewhere, and I could put my head onto the cylinder head. It just didn't get up to temperature. So I put a leather cloth in front of it, like I saw on many pictures of back in the day, and that helped me out tremendously. However, for the time being, I ran straight water with the what's it, ethylene glycol, antifreeze,
Yeah.
50-50 mix. And then, I don't know, the internet is a strange place, and people recommend stuff to you that maybe you shouldn't listen to. I read somewhere that it would be a good idea to keep distilled water in your radiator, because when you have, just like a tea kettle, when you have water in there and with a pressureless system, the water keeps evaporating, but the calcium and the limestone and all the stuff stays in the radiator. So the concentration of calcium, minerals, whatever, in the radiator increases, and at some point it's just going to turn your whole engine into a mess, of basically like a stone cave, and eliminate all possibilities of heat transfer and whatnot. And I believed all those stories and said, all right, at the next big oil change, I'm also going to change out my radiator fluid, and I'm going to put in distilled water. Ooh-wee. I had a leak-proof radiator before. I didn't after a day or two, because what I later then read up on is when you have just straight distilled water, it's neutral pH, so it's not going to do anything, but it's going to react with all the stuff that's in your engine, and it's going to react with the oxygen in the air, and that's going to gradually turn it, shall we call it sour, like a weak acid. And that's going to attack the brass in your radiator, and it's also going to dissolve what little limestone is in your radiator. And if it just so happens that your radiator is 90 years old and maybe there are some pinholes in there which have been kept perfectly sealed by limestone,
Yeah.
that's all gone away now. And I had numerous places where it just kept dripping out, and I didn't notice that for at least a month, because it was raining all day and I put the car away wet, and the next day it was still wet, and I didn't wonder about the little puddle on the floor. I just wondered why I had to keep adding water to the radiator, which I didn't have to do before. Long story short, the radiator is fixed up now, because a new radiator would cost you an arm and a leg, unfortunately. And then most reproduction radiators are aluminum, and they kind of, do electrochemical nonsense with the cast iron block, and they dissolve more quickly than a brass one would. So I had a dear friend of mine who was, fit with soldering old pieces of junk. He helped me out with just scooping all the leaks liberally with solder, and now, fingers crossed, it's leak-proof again. And I'm kind of shying away from distilled water. So yeah, straight water and antifreeze. That's basically what they are designed for.
Okay, yeah, good stuff. Now, we'll reckon we'll hit the final topic of future upgrades. So this, I suppose we could kind of ponder this for days, but the main one for me is that oil filter, partial flow preferably, and I have to fix that key. We were discussing this before, but so everyone's on the same page. My rear wheel, when I was doing the grease job this spring, I took the rear wheel and it went tunk tunk a little bit. It was jacked up, so the top of the wheel deflected about an inch, like that. So I took it apart, and the nut, the hub, could move a little bit on the axle, like say 1/8 of an inch. And the nut didn't seem to be stripped, but the threads were definitely a little bit gnarled. So tightened it, took my parents for ice cream the other day, came back, and tunk tunk again. So that, I have to fix that. Electrical, I'm pretty happy with. Oh, USB phone charger / Bluetooth speaker charger unit system, because as much as I love the, I think a little bit of jazz or something to kind of in the mood would be awful fitting for certain scenarios. Comfort. I need a windshield wiper too. I'll probably go electric, just because less things to worry about.
Yeah, the vacuum wiper is just a gimmick. It's not practicable.
It would be funny. It would be entertaining to talk about. Like the friend over here who had it. I think it was him who polished the drums so much that it started to go wah, 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 and it came off the windshield.
No way!
Yeah, it went so fast it started to come off. Like if this is your windshield, it started to do this. So that would have been pretty entertaining
It
to see,
became
I'm
its own
sure.
little propeller.
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah. So wiper. Other than that, I'm pretty happy with mine. The trunk. I have the tool, the trunk in the back. And the previous owner had the idea to support with turnbuckles from the bottom of the trunk to the spare tire, the spare wheel to some of the lug nuts that bolt on to hold the spare wheel on. He put two turnbuckles, so that takes a lot of the droop you see in some trunks. They kind of, some trunks do this.
Yeah.
Those turnbuckles really made it solid. Toolbox for the front, probably not. No, that's pretty good. That's about it. Those three things. What about you?
Well, I've made this into three categories, like things I
Okay.
have to fix, things that I want to do, and things that I'm going to do when the time comes. Things that I have to do is pretty quickly said. I'm going to have to rewire my indicator setup because in Germany there is a regulation for how they are supposed to be, and mine are right now one switch for left, one switch for right, and put both on, you got the hazards. Elegantly clever, I think, but you have to have a separate circuit for the hazards in Germany because, well, laws. And since in October I'm going to have to go for my 2-year tech inspection, I'm going to have to get that sorted before October comes around. I already sorted out, some period correct switches and made myself a little bracket, but I kind of do not want to dig into electric wiring, which worked perfectly, and strip it all apart and risk not having it working. So I kind of have to, get myself going on that. Things I want to do eventually or in the near future, silly stuff. Well, not silly stuff. First of all, you talked about experimenting with different carburetors way back. And I've been, my car runs very nicely and it does so at high speeds as well as low speeds. It's a little bit on the drinky side, although it's not terribly much compared to other Model A's. Still, I think it could do better. And I've been pondering about, taking the carburetor that's on it, the standard Zenith, taking it apart and putting high-end, perfect gaskets and nice Venturis in there and fresh nozzles, which are known to have the profile that they are meant to, because there is some reproductions which don't have round holes in them and they're supposed to be slightly tapered and the sizes are not what they should be. So that may be one way, because what I've been noticing in particular, if I'm going up a hill in second speed and go full throttle, then the car will go like, it like feeling it could do more, but somehow, I don't know, poor atomization. I think it's just, the nozzles which need to be taken care of. Or I could go for a different carburetor. And for that, I have an offer at hand, just rolled in yesterday from a guy that also owns a Model A, is roughly our age. And, we got into talking. And he currently is doing his brakes after I talked to him about what a huge difference it made. And his brakes were shot. So, rather than doing what needed to be done just to get them okay-ish, I just told him, well, invest the 250 extra quid and buy some proper drums for it as well. And so now the car is up on jack stands waiting for the new drums, and he's got a Solex carburetor on it, which is a carburetor that has been recommended by Ford in the mid-30s to fit onto the Model A. It's been fitted to French tractors and Renaults and Citroens and so on, and is still manufactured new today for quite a nice price though. And it needs special Venturis and jets in there in order to work with the Model A. But he's got himself one of those. And for whatever reason, he offered me to ship it over to me and have me test it for, say, a week or two, and see what kind of mileage and what kind of throttle response I get out of it. And, then make up my mind about whether I want to rebuild the Zenith or go for a different carburetor, because gas prices are getting quite high over here at the moment.
Here too. What are you at?
We're at €2.20 per liter.
€2.20. Okay, so what the heck are we at? We're about to hit $2 Canadian, which in comparison is not much, but we're used to 90 cents to $1.
Yeah. I mean, prices have about doubled over here.
Same.
For the last half a year, maybe. So it's, yeah. Then there's the kind of stuff which, you don't really, or I don't really need to do it, but I terribly, terribly want to do it. I mentioned the cooling problem or the heating problem in my car. I kind of want to automize that. So instead of having a strip of leather in front of the radiator, I have been pondering and tampering with a radiator shutter, which is basically like, a set of small strips of metal in front of the radiator, and by pulling on a rod or pulling a rope, they just open up like that, and you could control the steps in between. I'm currently reviving all my connections to different laser cutting premises and getting my gears here and getting stuff bent over there, and it's a work in progress. And I hope when I have all the parts on the table that it's just going to be put it together and it'll all work, and not everything will bind and it's going to be affected by a drive wind at 80 kilometers an hour or something. It's just going to work perfectly fine first time, I'm sure. And then when I've got that done, I'm going to equip my car with fender skirts. It's more of a mid-30s to end-30s kind of deal, but I saw one picture on the net with the car fitted with fender skirts or fender covers on the rear, and I thought, well, that looks pretty gangster. And these kind of modifications are very, very, very rare indeed in Germany, because in the US, it's kind of, car culture is, there's so many Model A's around that you can hot rod and chop them and put a big V8 in them as you please. In Germany, they all look alike. They all look like they just rolled out of the factory, maybe with a chrome stone guard added to them, but that's about all the modifications allowed. And I'm one of the most heavily modified with the fog lights up front. And so, I'm not a modder type of guy, but as long as these modifications are made in a way that they look semi-factory and that they can be reverted back to original. So I'm not going to drill any holes into the fenders to tack weld my fender skirts onto there. They're going to be, clamp on with rubber cushioning so they don't scratch the paint and whatnot. And, that's the idea at least. And, if I don't like them, just take them off again, and that's that. And last not least, should the time come that the engine needs rebuilding, it's going to get a counterweighted crank added to it. I'm not sure yet whether I want to weld up the old one with counterweights onto it, which, I mean, people do that, yes, and it seems to work fine. But on the other hand, it's a 90-year-old crank, and welding onto a piece as highly stressed as that is probably not going to help with metallurgy and with keeping all the bearings aligned and whatnot. So, they are readily made, forged from one piece, available too. So most likely the route I'm going to go. And then something has to happen with the transmission. I'm hesitant, and I'm never going to put a Mitchell overdrive into my car just because I dislike the idea of having two shift levers. That's basically the last thing that separates this car from a tractor, in my opinion. But there is many interesting ideas out there. Like you said, for example, the different rear end in the back. Maybe not the right thing for a mountainous region like I live in. On the other hand, I have a light car, so it might even out itself. I don't know. Mitchell sells a transmission which looks completely stock, but it has a 15% increase in first and second gear. It's also synchro mesh, so I'm not going to go that route because I like my crash box. But should the transmission eventually fail and new gears will have to be made for it anyways, then it wouldn't be such a big difference to just make different gears with different amount of teeth on them. I'm sure that could be done. Or fit a 4-speed truck gearbox to it. Now, the Model AA trucks have what's called a granny gear, which is basically if you're, 2.5 tons in the back and you're going such a hill and you need to pull a stump and, things just keep adding up. That's when you need the granny gear. So it's not just going to be take a 4-speed, put it in the Model A and drive with it. It's more going to be like take the housing and put whatever gear ratios I feel like are appropriate into the thing, maybe hide an overdrive in there. I haven't fully thought that out yet, but those are the kind of things that when I can't sleep, then I'm thinking about that.
Yeah, something that's always in the back of the mind, causing a bit of fuzz.
Exactly. But what if you tried? Well, we'll see. I mean, the transmission might outlast me for all I know, so maybe that'll never happen. But for now, I just keep it the way it is, and if it fails, then it's going to get modded.
Okay, future upgrades. Yeah, I think that's good for that. Are you do you have anything else to say today with respect to the old Model A?
Well, I mean, maybe for those of you out there wondering whether Model A is the right car for you or whether it's wise to take that choice or, to just leave pre-war cars for the nice car shows and to look at them, it's surprisingly easy. When I was new to the hobby and had nobody around me who drove an old car or anything, and I had only 1 or 2 experiences of what it was like sitting in an old car, I was, really doubting that a pre-war car would be drivable by modern standards. And it's a surprisingly relaxed car. It's loud in there, at least without a counterweighted crank, I tell you that. And you've got your limits when it comes to, top speed. And with the aforementioned gap between second and third gear, you're kind of on the verge of, running full speed up a hill in second or lugging the engine in third. Yeah, there is downsides, but on the other hand, it's a 90-year-old car. And for being that, it's surprisingly drivable. I've never had an occasion where I was, stranded on the side of the road or where the car wouldn't start in the morning, something like that. It's a damn reliable car, and I think this kind of image needs to, well, re-establish itself because more and more of these cars, when their owners die, find nobody who's going to take care of them, and they're just going to rot away in the museums. So they are not that expensive. I think it's always worth a try. Hopefully, maybe someday these cars will revive. I don't know how it is in Canada, but over here, pre-war cars, very rare sight, very rare.
It's similar over here. I wouldn't it definitely compared to the muscle cars because that's the guys in retirement age. That's what you see, and then some of the big 50s boats. But pre-war cars are less common, but there is still interest. There's hope. There is hope to see them continue.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a good closing note. Thank you very much for joining me. And
Thanks for having me.
oh, my pleasure. We'll have one of these again. And for those of you watching or listening or whatnot, let us know in the comments what you like, what you don't like, what you want to see more of, less of, so on and so forth. And we'll go from there. I know Adrian has some plans to I'm not going to spoil the surprise, but he has some good plans. So with that, I'll say have a good one and we'll talk soon.
Yep, you too. See ya. Bye.